In this class, I'm going to talk about the emphasis that's been put on the concepts of marketing, sales and production in developing the overall strategy or direction of businesses and how it has changed over time. The development of marketing can be viewed from several concepts. The production concept, for example, the way in the past producers, sellers would emphasize the importance of production. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Almost to the exclusion of everything else. The production was forefront in their minds in how to run a successful business. So the emphasis was on production. Later on, it moved to sales. And again, we will have a chat about that. And finally into marketing, which is the new emphasis and the one we currently seem to be operating under. A concept can be viewed as a philosophy which organizations adopt individually or pass through them as a consequence. So the concept is really what the organization believes. It's what they believe is the right course of action. And in this case, the context of the class, where should the organization put its emphasis? What should it concentrate upon? Should it concentrate upon production or sales, marketing? What's the distinction? What's the importance? Why has it gone through these phases, as it has? Let's start with the production concept. Now, this was very popular back really in the much later stages of the Industrial Revolution, going into the 1900s. But the Industrial Revolution, you could probably say, finished somewhere after the depressions of the 1870s. But there was still a large emphasis, a strong emphasis on production and the importance of production. So industrialists at the time paid particular attention to that, and they believed if they got production correct, everything else would follow. Everything else would be fine. So there was no need to concentrate on marketing or sales, or it would automatically happen. If they got production correct, that was all they needed. So the focus was on production and production efficiency. That's what they wanted. They wanted to make sure that they were producing it correctly and most efficiently. And that was something to be proud of. And industrialists of the times were very happy to think that their production system was efficient. Of course, by today's standard, we would think, well, are they producing the right product? Have they got the proper design? Is it market focused? That's the way we think now. But back then, it was, look at our business, we are very efficient. We have a very efficient production process. We have innovated the production process, therefore we are excellent people. So there's a big distinction between now and then. Products that yield the highest profits were mass-produced. It was a concentrated market where demand exceeded supply. Back in the late 1800s, there were not many products on the market. And whatever products were on the market were in demand, generally speaking. Consumers had not experienced such a proliferation of products. So when new products came onto the market, it generated a curiosity amongst the consumers who would look and investigate, and also fashion. They want to be the first to have whatever it was, this particular product. So the emphasis was on production, and the industrialists believed that if they got production correct, everything else would follow. Once they made the product, they didn't really have to market it, just make it available, and customers would want it. During the phase, competition was very small. Don't forget, back in the 1800s, there were not a lot of companies. There was virtually no international trade. Well, there was some, but mostly dominated by bigger companies who were importing spices and teas and perhaps trading somewhat overseas. But even then, the shipping industry was not properly tooled up for regular deliveries of products and so on. It was a very emerging state. It was not fixed. Everything was on the move. People were trying to figure out what is the next step forward. And they saw production, as I said earlier, as key to all of this. If they got production correct, made the products, then people would want them. You don't have to market. They didn't even think about marketing. The concept really wasn't out there. There was no concept of marketing. The concept was produce. Produce, and people would want it. So you didn't need marketing. And this really, going back to the Industrial Revolution back in the, whatever it was, from 1760 right through to whenever, say, the 1840s, 50s, whenever, it started to slow down as time went on, and now we emerged with what we've got now through greater technological change and greater understanding of how capitalism works, if you like. So the concept was to make a product range, put them in accessible places like shops, and people would buy them. So you didn't need anything else. And this is, of course, particularly true of necessities. But it applied really to nearly all goods. There was no marketing industry to turn to. There were some limited advertisements here and there, but not really marketing as we would know it. The focus of the organisation was to achieve high production efficiency, reduce cost, and mass distribution. Mass distribution and mass production, if possible. That was the emphasis. And to be an industrialist back then, that's all you had to remember. Be efficient, reduce costs, and produce lots, and make it available. And everything would be okay. Everything would be fine. So very straightforward concept, really. Not what we've got now. We've got a much more sophisticated understanding. We now need marketing, and we need a lot of other processes of diagnosis of the market. We need statistical evidence. We need research, market research. We need lots of things now that seemed back then were not seen as necessary. Just make the good, make it as cheaply as possible, mass produce it, and get it out there. The types of organisation who engaged in this, they were striving and driving through the whole plethora of different influences that act upon business. They were driving through all of that, trying to maximise sales. And customer needs and wants, they didn't really factor them in. They looked at the product and they thought, customers will obviously like this, so let's just make it. There was no real attempt at market research or market analysis or nothing that we think is normal now. That didn't happen. They just made whatever it was, put it in the shop, and went back and made some more. That was it. There was very little focus, almost none. And the sales team was to make sales happen. So they would have sales team, and they may even have people on commission paid by sales, by the number sold. So they recognised that sales was important, but marketing in the sense of looking at customer wants and customer satisfaction and follow-up post-sale, to make sure that the product met the consumer's wants and needs, and take the consumer's feedback and integrate it into new designs in the future. That didn't happen. They were looking at sales, trying to get maximum sales, but they were not really that orientated towards anything else. It still exists in many developing countries which focus on mass production. At least some writers suggest that. I think, probably like you and like everyone else, my view of the thing is that the so-called developing countries, a lot of them are mimicking what was seen to be successful in the developed countries, and quite rightly so. And if that meant taking feedback from the market and looking at a more orthodox marketing program, I'm sure that they will be doing that. So let's not take it as naively the case that the developing countries are just engaged in mass production. Many of them have a reputation for doing this. For example, we think of outsourcing to China. Well, China is now a very sophisticated economy. And it's unlikely that that image of China as the mass producer and the simple mass producer, that image and that reputation is not appropriate, I think, anymore. And that is also the case of many other countries. They develop their own culture, their own technology, their own way of doing things, and they break free from this very simplistic view that we're putting across here on the slide. The sales context really took place in after the war. It came in after the First World War. It really was in place, very general, very difficult to put dates on it, around up to 1950s, 1960s, thereabouts. So it was sell, sell, sell. No marketing, doesn't matter, just buy it, push it out there. And that really was the concept. And it was really around in a big way from the end of the First World War to about the 1950s, 1960s, early 60s in particular. There was, after around the 1950s, there was greater accessibility to new products. There was a proliferation in industrialization and consumer-based industrialization, where they were making products for the home. There were lots of inventions coming out that were suitable for the home. The vacuum cleaner is one that springs to mind. And people thought these were interesting developments. Television came out towards the end of the 1950s in a very rudimentary format, but people could see that could be an instrument for entertainment, home entertainment, whereas previously they would be limited to the radio, and before that to reading a book. And the only way you would hear live music is if you could hear a live musician playing. So there was greater accessibility to to new products and all of that throughout this period. There was greater emphasis on personal selling and advertising to drive sales. Now it was recognized by businesses that they needed to sell, and their emphasis on production was not good enough, because you could produce a lot and just have it in a warehouse. So to produce a lot and sell it, now they needed to take on board the techniques for selling. And this could be personal selling by incentivizing people to sell, giving them a percentage of the sales or whatever it was, or advertising it, trying to make it easier for the selling staff to make the sales, because people saw it on newspapers or in magazines or whatever, saw advertisements for it, and it looked fashionable and it looked trendy. The sales concept was based on aggressive selling. The focus was to sell what is produced rather than what the consumer wants. So he was quite aggressive. Companies were making items and they wanted them sold. Whether they were making the right items, the ones that precisely were required, the ones that would hit exactly the requirements of the consumer, that's debatable. And the literature of the time suggests that they were not really that worried about it too much. They just made the product, they got salespeople, sales personnel involved, told them to go out and sell it, and that was it. Whether they were making exactly the right product for the customer or not, well, that was not a big concern. Just sell. The focus was sell. And it was sell at all costs. And it doesn't matter how many hours it takes to make the sale, move on, sell the next one. The sales concept introduced a range of promotion and marketing techniques, still widely used. All sorts, from door-to-door selling to local papers and magazines, national press, free samples, whatever we're accustomed to, these were being introduced. They just didn't happen in the last 10 years. These have been around for a long time, and industry, the producers, they wanted to clear their production, make more. They were perhaps production orientated within the business, but they knew they needed to clear the production items, get them off, get them into the market and get them sold. And to do that, they would have to have different techniques, different types of promotion, advertising, marketing techniques, buy one, get one free, discounts for loyal customers, and whatever, all sorts of different incentives for people to buy. The goal of the sales concept was to beat competition. The capitalist system is based on competition. That's what makes it efficient. We have companies pitted against each other. And because they're pitted against each other, because they're fighting each other for the attention of the customer, they will make the best product and they'll make it as cheaply as possible. That's how we get competition. And each company is trying to beat the other. But in that, if you look at point number 3 here, towards the end it says there was no emphasis on customer satisfaction. It was just make it, beat the competitor and get it into the market and make the sale. It was quite aggressive. So, a bit unusual. Just make it, make the sale, and customer satisfaction, well, let's hope they're satisfied. The marketing concept is the most widely adopted marketing approach used today. We don't have an emphasis now on production or distribution. Most people don't care who made it. Well, there's loyalty to certain brands, but we're not really that too worked up about where it's made and how it's distributed and who brings it to the shop, and we're not too concerned about that. Nowadays, we want to focus on customer needs and wants rather than hard selling. Look at the customer and say, what does the customer want? What's the need? And does the product address that need? Does it fix the need? Does it help? And that's rather than putting your foot in the front door and trying to sell the product and bully the customer into buying it, or lying, or whatever you're going to do to make the sale. Just focus on the customer's needs and try and address those needs. And the marketing concept came in after the Second World War. Difficult to say when. It didn't start on a particular day, but somewhere in the 1950s. And it's probably started in America. Most of what's happened in the 20th century started in America, I think. So it started in America. America was more advanced. They had television way before everybody else. There were advertisements. They're very pro business. So it probably started there. And the idea was to make the buyer feel that they got good value for money, that their requirements were being addressed. So after the Second World War, there was increased competition and a wide range of product availability. People had been deprived during the Second World War. The Second World War was bad. It was bad for all sorts of reasons. But in terms of our little niche here, it was bad as well. The customers were deprived. And after the war, when economies started to come back, they were able to get more goods. And eventually, competition kicked off properly. And with competition, marketing and the importance of marketing was triggered as well. Customers had more options and increased disposable income after the war. After the war, there was a boom period. And we've seen films from the 1950s from America where middle-class children had quite good lives. We don't see so much of working-class children for some reason, and we don't see upper-class children. I'm using the class system here as defined in the UK, where I live. But we didn't see that so much in American films. But certainly it was the case that customers had more disposable income, and suddenly there was a demand for luxury goods like cars and televisions and modern technology. So there were more options available. Aggressive selling and production concepts became ineffective. People knew more. People had more self-confidence, and people were able to stand up for themselves. They weren't going to be bullied into or tricked into buying something they didn't necessarily want. So marketing had to become much more conducive to selling in the context of consumer wants. They needed to find out what the consumer wants were, research, and then address the wants, making sure that the product ticked all the boxes. The product addressed what the consumer wanted. That's important. So the emphasis was on customer needs and satisfaction. And that's a good way of summarizing all of that. Just looking at customer needs and satisfaction and trying to address those needs and give the customer satisfaction. So it wasn't just looking at the price, it was looking at value for money, looking at whether it was good value for money. And if it was, there was a chance of more sales. But also making sure that there was a real need for the good. If an organization wants to sustain long-term growth and profit, it must focus its efforts on the consumer and produce products and services that the target market requires. There's no point in making something that nobody wants. Simply because the owner of the business thinks it's a good idea doesn't make it a good idea. It's a good idea if it works in the marketplace. And it's only a good idea if it works in the marketplace. Otherwise, it is counterproductive. It's going to generate losses. The market-oriented organizations adopt a range of marketing techniques focused on customer satisfaction and demands. It's not just advertising, which everybody sort of jumps to. It's looking at what the customer wants from the product, looking at the lifespan of the product, having follow-up to the sale. After-sales services is important to make sure that the customers have access to it if it's appropriate. Not all products need that, but if it is appropriate, it's there. That if the customer is not unsure how to use it, there is support. Generally speaking, they are not buying a product and then abandoned. There is some comeback with the product. And these is how the marketing concept grew to replace the production concept. And that's all we're going to deal with in this video. So let's stop it there and say thank you for watching.